Montana Territory, 1875. The vast, unforgiving landscape swallowed men whole, chewed them up, and spit out what remained. Most folks who wandered these parts knew that survival meant keeping your head down and your heart guarded. Rancher Robert Mason knew this better than most as he guided his horse through the blinding snow, the bitter wind cutting through his wool coat like it was nothing more than cotton. At 25, he'd already lived more lifetimes than men twice his age, each one teaching him the same brutal lesson. In this untamed country, attachment was just another word for vulnerability. The snowstorm had caught him off guard, separating him from his cattle drive heading south. His men would likely make camp and wait for him, but with visibility reduced to arm's length and the temperature plummeting, Robert knew he needed shelter fast or he'd be joining the countless others who'd perished in Montana's merciless winters. "Easy, Thunder," he murmured to his chestnut stallion, whose muscles tensed beneath him. "We just need to find somewhere to wait this out." Robert pulled his hat lower, squinting against the stinging snow. The faint outline of something solid emerged through the white haze, a structure of some kind. Hope kindled in his chest, though he tempered it with caution. Out here, a stranger's door could open to a rifle barrel as easily as hospitality. He'd built his reputation as a competent, fair-minded rancher whose word was as solid as the mountains surrounding his land. But he kept his distance from the townsfolk in nearby Silvercrest, limiting his visits to necessary supply runs and business dealings. Loneliness was the price of independence, he'd decided long ago. The son of a drunk who'd gambled away their family home back east, Robert had learned early that depending on others was a fool's gamble, and love was the riskiest bet of all. As he drew closer, the structure revealed itself to be a modest cabin nestled among a stand of pines, smoke curling from its chimney, a beacon of warmth in the frigid wilderness. Relief flooded through him, though wariness remained. Whoever dwelled here was a recluse, their homestead miles from the nearest neighbor. Robert dismounted, his boots sinking deep into the snow as he led Thunder toward a small lean-to beside the cabin. His numb fingers worked to secure his horse before he approached the door, hesitating only briefly before knocking firmly. The door swung open, revealing not the grizzled mountain man he'd expected, but a young woman whose wary expression matched the cocked rifle in her hands. She couldn't have been more than 22, with honey-blonde hair falling in loose waves past her shoulders and eyes the color of summer cornflowers, startling against her wind-flushed cheeks. Her simple blue calico dress was practical for frontier life, covered by a wool shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "State your business," she said firmly, the rifle steady in her grip. Robert raised his gloved hand slowly. "Name's Robert Mason. My cattle drive got caught in this storm and I got separated from my men, just looking for shelter until it passes, ma'am. I can sleep in your barn if you've got one." She studied him for a long moment, taking in his lean, muscular frame, the dusting of snow on his broad shoulders, and the earnestness in his hazel eyes. His face was clean-shaven but for a light stubble that had grown during the drive, and despite the cold, there was a warmth to his features that didn't match his guarded demeanor. "No barn," she finally said, lowering the rifle slightly. "Just the lean-to where you put your horse." Another pause, then reluctantly, "You can come in until the storm passes, but keep your hands where I can see them." "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you kindly." Robert stepped inside, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. The cabin's interior was modest but well-maintained. A single room with a stone fireplace at one end, a small kitchen area, and a curtained-off section that likely served as her sleeping quarters. The warmth enveloped him immediately, and he had to resist the urge to groan in relief. "You can hang your coat by the fire to dry," she said, closing the door behind him but keeping a careful distance. The rifle remained in her hands, though no longer aimed directly at him. "I'm Olivia O'Connor." "Pleased to meet you, Miss O'Connor. I appreciate your hospitality." "Don't mistake necessity for hospitality, Mr. Mason," she replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than unkind. "A dead man on my property would bring more trouble than I need." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough." As he removed his coat and gloves, steam rising from the damp wool in the fireplace's heat, Robert observed his reluctant hostess from the corner of his eye. There was a story here: young women didn't typically live alone in the wilderness unless circumstances forced them to it. "Stew's almost ready," she said, moving to stir a pot hanging over the fire. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot." After hours in that storm, hot is all I care about. He remained standing, unsure of his welcome despite her offer of food. "Your homestead, you been out here long." "Long enough," her guarded response told him not to press further. "Well, you've done fine work with the place," he observed, noting the tight chinking between logs that kept out the bitter cold, the neat stack of firewood, the organized shelves of preserved foods. "Not many could manage alone out here." Something flickered across her face, pride perhaps, or defiance. "I manage just fine, Mr. Mason." "I don't doubt it." They ate in relative silence, the howling wind and crackling fire the only conversation. The stew was simple but hearty, venison with root vegetables, and Robert found himself hungrier than he'd realized. When he finished, he insisted on washing his bowl despite her protests. "Least I can do," he said firmly. "My mother taught me guests earn their keep." Olivia watched him, curiosity softening her wariness. "Your mother taught you well." Night fell swiftly, the storm showing no signs of abating. After awkward negotiations, Olivia agreed he could sleep on a bedroll near the fire, while she retreated behind the curtain to her bed, the rifle propped nearby. "I'll be gone at first light, storm or no," Robert assured her, settling onto the floor. "Got men waiting on me." "See that you are," came her reply from behind the curtain. But morning brought no respite. The storm had intensified, snow now piled halfway up the door. Attempting to leave would be suicide, a fact they both acknowledged with reluctant glances. 2 days, Olivia said firmly. "Most these storms blow through in 2 days." And so began their uneasy coexistence. Forced proximity in the small cabin gradually wore down their initial reserve. By the second day, Robert had chopped enough wood to replenish what he'd used and then some, repaired a loose shutter, and helped Olivia preserve the last of her autumn apples. He worked methodically, efficiently, speaking little but observing much. Olivia O'Connor was no ordinary homesteader. Her bookshelf contained volumes of Emerson, Thoreau, and scientific texts alongside practical farming guides. When she thought he wasn't looking, she scribbled in a leather-bound journal. Her hands, though calloused from work, moved with a grace that suggested another life before this one. "You're not what I expected," she admitted that evening as they shared a meal of rabbit stew, the storm still raging outside. "And what did you expect, Miss O'Connor?" She considered him thoughtfully. "Most men who come through these parts are looking for something: gold, land, escape from the law. They see a woman alone and think, well, you know what they think." Robert nodded grimly. "I've met those men. Can't say I count myself among them." "No," she said quietly, "I don't believe you do." The next morning brought unexpected sunshine, brilliant and blinding against the fresh snow. They stood in the doorway, squinting at the transformed landscape. "Your men will be worried," Olivia said. "They know I can handle myself." Robert pulled on his coat, reluctance in his movements that surprised him. "But I should get back." "Yes, you should." He saddled Thunder, loaded with provisions she'd insisted on providing despite his protests. As he prepared to leave, an awkwardness fell between them, neither quite knowing how to end this unexpected interlude. "Miss O'Connor, Olivia," he finally said, "thank you not just for the shelter." "What else would I be thanking me for, Mr. Mason?" A hint of challenge in her voice, but her eyes held something softer. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "For reminding me that good company exists, even in the middle of nowhere." "Even unwanted company?" she asked, a small smile playing at her lips. "Especially that kind." He tipped his hat and mounted Thunder. "If you ever need anything." "I won't," she assured him firmly, "but thank you all the same." Robert nodded, understanding her pride. But as he rode away, glancing back to see her small figure framed in the doorway, something shifted inside him. a crack in the careful fortress he'd built around himself. 3 weeks passed. Robert threw himself into work at his ranch, 10 miles south of Olivia's cabin and 15 from Silver Crest. Spring was approaching, bringing new calves and endless tasks, yet his thoughts continually drifted to the solitary woman in her well-kept cabin. It was during his monthly supply run to Silvercrest that he overheard the conversation that sent ice through his veins. "Shame about that O'Connor woman," one man said to another outside the general store. "Living out there all alone, refusing proper company." "Won't be for long," the other replied. "Heard Jensen's making another offer for her land, says the town needs that water source and she's sitting right on it." "Offer?" "Last I heard, it wasn't so much an offer as a threat." Robert's hand tightened on his horse's reins. Charles Jensen owned the largest business interests in Silver Crest, the bank, the mine, and most of the commercial buildings. He was not a man accustomed to hearing no. Without conscious decision, Robert found himself riding north after completing his purchases, concern driving him toward Olivia's homestead. The trail was muddy from melting snow, slowing his progress, but by late afternoon, the familiar cabin came into view. He approached cautiously, not wanting to alarm her. Smoke rose from the chimney, and he could see her working in a newly tilled garden patch. "Hello, the house," he called when close enough. Olivia straightened, her hand moving instinctively toward her waist where he suspected a pistol was tucked. Recognition dawned and her posture relaxed slightly, though wariness remained. "Mr. Mason," she acknowledged as he dismounted, "is there a problem?" "I was hoping to ask you the same question," he said, leading Thunder closer. "Heard some troubling talk in town." Her expression hardened. "You rode all this way because of gossip." "I rode all this way because Charles Jensen doesn't take rejection well, and word is he's set his sights on your land." Olivia's face paled slightly, but her chin raised in defiance. "My land is not for sale. I've made that clear to Mr. Jensen and his lackeys several times now." "May I?" Robert gestured toward the cabin porch. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. They settled on the simple wooden bench, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. "The stream that runs through your property," Robert began. "It feeds into the creek that powers Jensen's mill, doesn't it?" "It does. And since the drought last summer, it's become the most reliable water source in the county." Her hands twisted in her lap. "He first offered to buy just the water rights. When I refused, he offered to buy the entire property." Each offer came with thinly veiled suggestions about what happens to women alone in the wilderness. Anger flared in Robert's chest. "Has he threatened you directly?" "Not in so many words. But last week one of his men happened to be hunting near my property line, shot close enough that I heard the bullet whistle past." Her voice remained steady, but Robert could see the tension in her shoulders. "I'm not naive, Mr. Mason. I know what comes next." "Robert," he corrected gently, "after sheltering me from certain death, I think we're past formalities." This earned him a small smile. "Robert, then." "Why here, Olivia?" he asked after a moment. "Why fight so hard for this particular piece of land?" She was quiet so long he thought she might not answer. Then she stood, motioning for him to follow. They walked to a small rise behind the cabin where 3 wooden crosses stood in a neat row. "My father, mother, and younger brother," she said softly. "Fever took them 2 winters ago. We were on our way west from Boston, looking for a new start after father's business failed. This is where they died, so this is where I stayed." "I'm sorry," Robert said, the words inadequate but sincere. "They're buried in ground they paid for with their lives. I won't let Jensen or anyone else take it." Her voice broke slightly. "This is all I have left of them." In that moment, Robert understood her completely, the fierce independence, the isolation, the determination. She was protecting more than land, she was preserving memory, honoring sacrifice. "You shouldn't have to face this alone," he said. "I don't have much choice." She turned back toward the cabin. "I appreciate your concern, Robert, but this is my fight." "What if it doesn't have to be?" The question hung between them as they returned to the porch. Robert's mind was already racing with possibilities, weighing options, considering strategies. "Jensen respects one thing: power," Robert said finally. "And out here, that usually means men with guns or men with money." "I have neither," Olivia replied dryly, "but I have both." The words surprised even him. Not as much as Jensen, but enough to make him pause. She studied him intently. "Why would you help me? You barely know me." It was a fair question, one Robert had been asking himself during the ride here. The answer was complicated, tied to things he wasn't ready to examine fully: the connection he'd felt during those snowbound days, the admiration for her strength, the growing need to protect what mattered to her. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because I know what it's like to fight alone against men who think they can take whatever they want." Something unspoken passed between them, recognition of shared experience beyond words. Olivia nodded slowly. "What did you have in mind?" The plan was simple but effective. Robert would publicly announce a business partnership with Olivia, positioning her land as part of his growing ranching operation. It wasn't unheard of for unmarried men and women to enter business arrangements, though eyebrows would certainly raise. But Robert's reputation as a straight shooter would lend credibility, and more importantly, his armed cowboys would provide security. They rode into Silvercrest together the following week, causing a stir of whispers and sideways glances. Olivia sat tall in the saddle, dressed in her best skirt and blouse, ignoring the curious stares as they made their way to Jensen's bank. Charles Jensen was a corpulent man in his 50s with small, calculating eyes and an overly formal manner that masked ruthlessness. His surprise at seeing them together was quickly concealed behind a politician's smile. "Miss O'Connor, what an unexpected pleasure. And Mr. Mason, I don't believe I've seen you in town twice in the same month before." Jensen gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "What brings you both to my humble establishment?" "Business, Mr. Jensen," Robert said, remaining standing while Olivia took a seat. "Miss O'Connor and I have entered into a partnership agreement. I'll be utilizing her land for my northern grazing operations, and she'll be receiving a percentage of my cattle profits in return." Jensen's smile tightened. "Is that so? How enterprising of you both." "We've already signed the contracts," Olivia added, her voice calm despite the tension Robert could see in her posture. "Mr. Mason's men will be a regular presence on the property from now on." The implied message was clear. She was no longer alone and unprotected. Jensen leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I see. Well, I had hoped to continue our previous discussions about acquiring your property, Miss O'Connor. The town's growth depends on secure water access, as I've explained before." "My partnership with Mr. Mason doesn't affect the stream," Olivia replied. "The water continues to flow downstream just as it always has." "For now, perhaps," Jensen's voice hardened slightly. "But cattle operations require significant water resources. I wonder if the town council will approve such usage when it might impact our municipal needs." Robert stepped forward. "Any concerns about water rights can be addressed through proper legal channels, Mr. Jensen. I'm sure we can come to an equitable arrangement that serves everyone's interests." "Legal channels," Jensen repeated with a thin smile. "Of course, though the law can be interpreted differently depending on one's standing in the community." The threat wasn't subtle. Robert maintained his composure, but his voice carried a steel edge when he responded. "Funny thing about standing, Mr. Jensen, it can change quickly. I've invited several investors from Helena to visit next month, men interested in alternative shipping methods for cattle that might bypass certain local fee structures." Jensen's face darkened. The rail spur he controlled was his most profitable venture, charging ranchers handsomely to transport their cattle to eastern markets. "That sounds like a threat, Mason." "Just business," Robert replied evenly, "like your interest in Miss O'Connor's water rights." The tension in the room was palpable. Finally, Jensen forced another smile. "Perhaps we've all been hasty. I'm sure reasonable people can reach reasonable accommodations." He stood, indicating the meeting was over. I look forward to seeing how your partnership develops." Outside the bank, Olivia released a shaky breath. "He's not giving up." "No," Robert agreed, helping her onto her horse. "But he'll be more careful now, more calculating. That buys us time." What neither said aloud was that their ruse had just become very real. To maintain the facade, Robert would indeed need to station men near her property. Their lives were now entangled in ways neither had anticipated when he knocked on her door during that snowstorm. As they rode back toward her cabin, Robert found himself watching Olivia's profile against the spring sky, admiring the quiet determination in her expression. Something was growing between them, something neither had planned for and both were careful not to name. Over the next month, their business arrangement evolved into something far more complex. Robert visited regularly, first bringing two of his most trusted hands to establish a small line camp near her property, then coming alone to help with repairs and improvements to her homestead. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the days. Olivia proved knowledgeable about crops and medicinal plants, while Robert taught her about cattle and predator signs. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, spanning books they'd read, places they'd seen, and carefully, tentatively, the sorrows that had shaped them. "My father drank away everything we had back in Ohio," Robert told her one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "By 15, I was doing a man's work to keep food on the table for my mother and sisters. When he finally gambled away the deed to our house, I headed west with nothing but determination to never be that vulnerable again." "Is that why you keep to yourself?" "Fear of vulnerability?" Olivia asked softly. Robert considered this. "Partly, but mostly it's simpler than that. Trusting people means giving them power to hurt you. Out here, that's a luxury few can afford." "Yet you trusted me during that snowstorm," she pointed out. "I could have robbed you blind while you slept." He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "You had a rifle pointed at me. Seemed more dangerous not to trust you." She laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet landscape. "Fair point. What about you?" he asked after a moment. "You were educated in Boston, that much is obvious from your books and the way you speak. What brought your family west?" Olivia's smile faded. "My father was a professor of natural sciences, brilliant man but not practical. He invested everything in a colleague's invention that promised to revolutionize textile manufacturing." She sighed. "It failed spectacularly. The scandal cost him his position, and Boston society has little tolerance for fallen academics. So he decided to start fresh in Montana territory. He had romantic notions about the West, self-sufficiency, natural abundance, freedom from societal constraints." A sad smile touched her lips. "He wasn't entirely wrong, but he wasn't prepared for the reality either." "Few are," Robert acknowledged. "It's a beautiful, brutal land." "Yes," she agreed, looking out over the landscape that had claimed her family yet somehow become home. "Beautiful and brutal." As twilight deepened around them, Robert found himself reluctant to leave, to break the fragile connection forming between them. But propriety demanded he return to his own ranch, and so he did, though his thoughts remained with the golden-haired woman whose strength and vulnerability had begun to breach the walls around his heart. News traveled fast in small frontier communities. By mid-spring, speculation about Robert and Olivia's relationship had become the favorite topic in Silvercrest saloons and general store. Some approved of the practical arrangement. Others questioned its propriety. All waited to see what would develop. Charles Jensen watched and listened, biding his time. The water flowing from Olivia's property had become even more critical with the dry spring they were experiencing. His mill operations were already suffering, and the town council was pressuring him for solutions. The opportunity he'd been waiting for arrived in the form of Robert's absence. A telegram from his cattle buyer in Cheyenne required Robert's immediate attention, forcing him to leave for at least a week. Though he stationed 3 of his men at the line camp near Olivia's property, his absence left a vulnerability Jensen was quick to exploit. 3 days after Robert's departure, Olivia was working in her garden when she noticed the smoke. At first, just a thin plume rising from the direction of the line camp, but quickly growing thicker, darker. Grabbing her rifle, she ran toward it, heart pounding. The small cabin Robert's men used was engulfed in flames, the heat intense even from a distance. Two of the men were frantically trying to control the fire while the third lay on the ground, clutching his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. "What happened?" she demanded, dropping to her knees beside the injured cowboy. "Ambush," he grimaced. "Three men, faces covered, shot at us from the trees, then threw something that exploded against the cabin. Oil or kerosene, maybe." The implications were clear. This was no accident, no random attack by drifters. This was a message, a demonstration of vulnerability. That night, after treating the injured man and helping the others establish a makeshift camp, Olivia sat alone in her cabin, rifle across her lap. Every sound made her start: the wind in the trees, an owl's call, the settling of the cabin's timbers. Sleep was impossible. By morning, her fear had hardened into resolve. She rode into Silvercrest alone, ignoring the concerned protests of Robert's men. If Jensen wanted to intimidate her, he'd have to do it to her face. The town was unusually busy, wagons and riders clogging the main street. As she tied her horse outside the general store, the owner's wife approached with an expression of mingled concern and excitement. "Miss O'Connor, we didn't expect to see you today, what with the town meeting and all." "Town meeting?" Olivia asked, immediately alert. "About the water crisis. Mr. Jensen called an emergency session after the mill had to stop operations yesterday. They're voting on some sort of emergency water appropriation act." Olivia didn't wait to hear more. She hurried toward the town hall, a converted church at the end of the main street. Inside, it seemed every resident of Silvercrest had gathered. Charles Jensen stood at the front, gesturing emphatically as he addressed the crowd. "Cannot allow the economic future of our community to be held hostage by private interests. The drought has reduced water flow by nearly 40%, and certain upstream operations are diverting what little remains." Olivia pushed through to the front, aware of the sudden hush that fell over the room as people noticed her. "That's a lie," she said clearly, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "No water is being diverted from my property. The drought affects everyone equally." Jensen's momentary surprise gave way to calculated sympathy. "Miss O'Connor, no one is accusing you personally. But the fact remains that the new cattle operation on your land requires significant water resources that were previously available to the town." "There are no cattle on my land yet," she countered. "Mr. Mason's plans won't commence until summer, and even then, the herd will be small enough to have minimal impact on water flow." The town mayor, a nervous man clearly in Jensen's pocket, cleared his throat. "Be that as it may, Miss O'Connor, we're considering this issue proactively. The proposed ordinance would establish community water rights that supersede private claims during drought conditions." "Meaning you could take control of my stream without compensation," Olivia translated coldly. "How convenient after Mr. Jensen's offers to buy my land were rejected." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many townsfolk shifted uncomfortably, aware of the politics at play but dependent on Jensen's businesses for their livelihoods. "This isn't about your land, Miss O'Connor," Jensen said smoothly. "It's about ensuring Silvercrest's survival. Without water for the mill, half the town loses employment. Without irrigation for the community gardens, food becomes scarce. Surely you don't place your personal interests above the needs of an entire town." It was skillfully done, positioning her as selfish and uncaring while presenting himself as the community's champion. Olivia felt the crowd's mood shifting against her. The fire at Mr. Mason's line camp yesterday, she said loudly, changing tactics. "Was that also about ensuring the town's survival, Mr. Jensen?" Gasps and whispers erupted. Jensen's face darkened momentarily before he regained his composure. "I'm sorry to hear about any fire, but I fail to see the relevance. Natural accidents occur frequently in the wilderness." There was nothing natural about men with covered faces shooting at ranch hands before setting fire to their cabin, Olivia replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. A serious accusation, the mayor interjected nervously. Do you have proof of who these men might be? Not yet, she admitted, but the timing seems rather convenient, doesn't it, just days after Mr. Mason leaves town, and right before this emergency meeting to seize control of my water rights. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Jensen's supporters tried to redirect the conversation, but doubt had been planted. After heated debate, the mayor reluctantly postponed the vote until the next meeting, 2 weeks hence. As the gathering dispersed, Jensen approached Olivia, his public smile firmly in place but his eyes cold. Dangerous accusations, Miss O'Connor. A young woman in your isolated position should be more careful. Are you threatening me, Mr. Jensen? She asked quietly, merely offering friendly advice, his voice lowered. Mason won't always be around to protect you. Even now, he's far away in Cheyenne, and accidents happen so easily in the territories. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her shaken but more determined than ever. Robert returned 4 days later, riding hard when news of the fire and town meeting reached him in Cheyenne. He found Olivia and his men vigilant but unharmed, though tension hung heavy in the air. It was Jensen, Robert stated flatly after hearing the full account. They were alone in her cabin, a pot of coffee between them at her small table. No proof, but it has his signature all over it. The town's divided, Olivia explained. Some support the water appropriation as necessary for community survival, others see it as Jensen making a power play. The vote's been postponed, but only temporarily. Robert's face was grim. We have 2 weeks to change enough minds to defeat the ordinance. And if we can't, the question hung heavy between them, then we fight it legally. I have connections in Helena, lawyers who specialize in water rights. It could take months, even years, but... I don't have years, Robert, Olivia interrupted softly. My supplies are limited, and after this confrontation, I doubt Jensen will allow me easy access to town resources. He controls the merchants, the bank, the shipping. The reality of their situation settled over them. Jensen had the power to make life untenable, to isolate them completely if legal means didn't achieve his goals. And as the fire had demonstrated, he wasn't above using more direct methods. There's another option, Robert said finally, his voice hesitant in a way she'd never heard before. One that would strengthen our position legally and socially. Olivia raised her eyes to his, seeing the conflict there, the uncertainty mixed with something deeper. Marriage, she said quietly, the word hanging between them. He nodded, leaning forward earnestly. As husband and wife, our claim to the land would be even stronger. Jensen would have a harder time turning the town against a proper family establishment versus a questionable business arrangement between an unmarried man and woman. A marriage of convenience, Olivia clarified, her tone carefully neutral. Yes, strictly practical. Robert's gaze dropped to his coffee cup. It would give us the best chance of protecting your land. Olivia studied him, this man who had ridden into her life during a snowstorm and somehow become essential to it. What began as a reluctant shelter had evolved into friendship, partnership, and something more neither of them had acknowledged aloud. And after, she asked, when the threat from Jensen is resolved one way or another, would we simply dissolve this practical arrangement? Robert looked up, something vulnerable in his expression that made her breath catch. We could, if that's what you wanted. Is it what you want? She pressed. The question seemed to startle him. For a man so direct in business and ranching matters, he suddenly found words difficult. I think, he began carefully, that sometimes the most practical decisions can have unexpected consequences. Feelings that weren't anticipated. Feelings, she repeated, her heart quickening. Yes, he reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. Olivia, I didn't plan to care for you. God knows I've spent years ensuring I didn't care too deeply about anything that could be taken away. But these past months, working alongside you, seeing your strength and determination. Robert, Let me finish, please. His grip tightened slightly. I'm not proposing marriage only for practical reasons, though those are compelling enough. I'm proposing because the thought of not being with you, of returning to my solitary existence, has become more painful than I can bear. Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes, unexpected emotion welling up. You've never spoken like this before. I've never felt like this before, he admitted, vulnerability plain in his face. I've spent my life believing that independence meant safety, that needing no one meant never being disappointed. But you've shown me there's another kind of strength in connection, in standing together. Olivia turned her hand beneath his, intertwining their fingers. Are you certain? Marriage is no small commitment, especially out here where divorce is nearly impossible. I've never been more certain of anything, he said simply. I love you, Olivia O'Connor. I think I have since you pointed that rifle at me and demanded I state my business. A laugh escaped her, mingled with a sob. That's a rather unusual beginning to a love story. We're rather unusual people, he countered with a smile. She rose and moved around the table, drawn to him by a force she no longer wanted to resist. Robert stood to meet her, his hands gentle as they framed her face. Is that a yes? He whispered, searching her eyes. Yes, she answered, the word carrying the weight of all she'd been afraid to hope for. Yes, I'll marry you, Robert Mason, for practical reasons and impractical ones too. His kiss was both tender and fierce, a promise and a claiming. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Olivia rested her forehead against his. Jensen won't give up easily, she cautioned. Let him come, Robert replied, his arms tightening around her. Some things are worth fighting for. They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Silvercrest. The ceremony was small but not private. Robert had insisted on making it as public as possible, inviting key townspeople, and ensuring the news would spread quickly. Jensen's reaction was immediate. The day after the wedding, notices appeared throughout town announcing that the postponed meeting would proceed as scheduled, with additional concerns about the consolidation of natural resources under private monopolies. He's trying to reframe the narrative, Robert explained as they rode back from town after seeing the notices. Make us look like land grabbers threatening the town's future, rather than a family protecting its rightful property. Will it work? Olivia asked, still adjusting to the gold band on her finger and the new surname that accompanied it. With some, yes, fear is a powerful motivator, and Jensen knows how to manipulate it. He reached across to squeeze her hand. But we have something he doesn't. What's that? The truth, and just enough good people willing to listen to it. Over the next 10 days, Robert and Olivia implemented their strategy. They invited influential townsfolk to visit their property, showing them the modest water usage and explaining their plans for responsible stewardship. Robert's foreman organized other ranchers who depended on the same watershed, forming a coalition against Jensen's attempted water grab. Meanwhile, Olivia wrote letters to territorial officials in Helena, detailing Jensen's tactics of intimidation and the suspicious fire. Her education and articulate writing proved invaluable, lending credibility to their case beyond what Robert's practical reputation alone could achieve. The night before the decisive town meeting, they sat together on their porch now, Robert thought with wonder, watching stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. Whatever happens tomorrow, Olivia said softly, I want you to know I don't regret any of it. Robert drew her closer against his side. Nor do I, though I admit this isn't how I imagined married life would begin, fighting a town power broker for survival. She laughed, the sound warming him more than the spring air. We seem to specialize in unusual beginnings. As long as we're together for the middle and the end, he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Their peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders moving fast through the darkness. Robert was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Get inside, he ordered Olivia, his voice tight, but she was already reaching for her own weapon. I stand with my husband, she said firmly. There was no time to argue. The riders, 5 of them, emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by bandanas. They reined in at the edge of the clearing just beyond easy rifle range. "Mason," one called out, "final warning. Withdraw your opposition to the water ordinance, or there won't be anything left to protect." "That you under that mask, Peterson," Robert called back, recognizing the voice of Jensen's foreman. "Delivering threats for your boss now. This is your only chance. The meeting's tomorrow and accidents happen." Robert's grip tightened on his rifle. "You already tried burning us out." "Didn't work then, won't work now." "Maybe we weren't aiming to burn the right thing," another rider called. "Lots of dry brush around here. Wind picks up, fire could spread for miles. Might even reach that pretty stream you're so protective of." The implication was clear. They were threatening to start a wildfire that would destroy everything. "You'd risk the entire valley to get your way," Olivia demanded, stepping forward. "There are other ranches, other homesteads that would burn too." "Sometimes progress requires sacrifice," the leader replied coldly. "Think about it overnight. Jensen's a reasonable man, surrender the water rights willingly, and you can keep the rest." With that, they wheeled their horses and galloped away, leaving Robert and Olivia staring after them in stunned silence. "They're insane," Olivia whispered. "A fire this time of year with everything so dry it could burn for weeks." Robert's face was grim. "Jensen's desperate. The coalition we've built has him worried, and he's showing his true nature now." "What do we do?" He pulled her close, his mind racing through options. "We adapt the plan, and we make sure everyone in Silvercrest knows exactly what kind of man is leading them before tomorrow's vote." The town hall was packed beyond capacity when Robert and Olivia arrived the next day. Word of the nighttime threats had spread, aided by Robert's men who'd ridden at dawn to alert neighboring ranchers. The mood was tense, divided, with Jensen's supporters clustered near the front and the opposition, larger than expected, filling the back and sides. Jensen himself sat with the town council, his expression confident despite the unexpected crowd. When the mayor called the meeting to order, Jensen rose to speak first, his voice projecting practiced sincerity. "Friends and neighbors, we face a crisis not of our making. The drought threatens our livelihoods, our very survival in this harsh land. All I propose is a fair sharing of God's natural bounty during times of scarcity." Murmurs of agreement rose from his supporters as he continued, painting a picture of community need versus private greed. When he finished, the mayor called on Robert, who walked deliberately to the front, Olivia beside him. "Mr. Jensen speaks eloquently about community needs," Robert began. "And I agree, in times of crisis, neighbors should help neighbors. That's the Western way." He paused, looking around the room. "But this ordinance isn't about helping neighbors. It's about one man's attempt to control what he couldn't buy." Jensen's face tightened as Robert recounted the progression, the repeated offers to purchase Olivia's land, each refusal met with escalating pressure. When he described the fire at the line camp, angry mutterings spread through the crowd. "But last night crossed a line none of us should accept," Robert continued. "Armed men threatened to start a wildfire that could destroy everything in this valley, not just our home, but many of yours too." "Outrageous accusations," Jensen sputtered, rising to his feet. "Where's your proof? Anyone can claim midnight threats." "We don't need to claim them," Olivia said clearly, stepping forward, "because we expected them." She nodded toward the back of the hall, where the sheriff now stood with a tall stranger beside him. "This is Marshal Williams from the Federal Territorial Office," the sheriff announced. "He arrived yesterday at my request." The marshal stepped forward, his badge glinting in the light streaming through the windows. "At approximately 10 o'clock last night, I witnessed 5 men threaten Mr. and Mrs. Mason with arson if they didn't surrender their water rights. I recognized 2 of them despite their disguises, both employees of Mr. Jensen's mill." The room erupted. Jensen shouted denials, claiming a conspiracy against him, but the damage was done. Even his supporters looked uncertain now, the reality of threatened wildfire striking too close to home for comfort. When the vote finally came, the water appropriation ordinance was defeated decisively. Jensen stormed out, threats of legal action trailing behind him, but his power had been broken. Too many had seen his willingness to risk everything for control. As the crowd dispersed, townspeople stopped to congratulate Robert and Olivia, many apologizing for not standing with them sooner. The transformation was remarkable, from outsiders to respected community members in the space of an afternoon. "You planned this," the sheriff said quietly as they prepared to leave. Brought in the marshal knowing Jensen would make his move. "We suspected," Robert acknowledged. "Men like Jensen follow patterns. Push them hard enough, they reveal their true nature." "Risky gamble," the sheriff observed. "Could have gone badly." "Worth the risk," Olivia replied, her hand firm in Robert's. "Some things are." Summer blossomed across the Montana landscape, painting the valleys in wildflowers and verdant growth despite the lingering drought. The stream flowing through the Mason property remained strong, nourishing their growing operation while continuing downward to serve the town's needs. Jensen had left Silvercrest a month after his defeat, selling his interests to investors from Helena who proved more reasonable in their dealings with local ranchers. The town was changing, growing in healthier ways now that his stranglehold had been broken. On their cabin porch, expanded now with Robert's carpentry skills, Olivia sat beside her husband in the evening light, her journal open on her lap. "What are you writing?" Robert asked, his arm comfortable around her shoulders. "Our story," she replied, smiling up at him. "For the children we might have someday. How a snowstorm brought a lost cowboy to my door, and how the town had other plans for us." "But we had other plans for ourselves," he finished, pressing a kiss to her temple. The cabin behind them was no longer lonely, no longer merely shelter from the wilderness. It had become a home in the truest sense, a place of belonging, of shared purpose, of love that had proved stronger than fear or isolation. As twilight settled over the valley that had nearly divided them but ultimately united them instead, Robert and Olivia Mason watched the stars emerge, secure in the knowledge that some beginnings, however unlikely, lead exactly where they're meant to.